guys, I know I'm a little bit late to the discussion about the Disney live-action remake of Snow White. So much has already been said about the movie, about the controversies behind it, about how it poorly performed, and I don't really want to discuss that. I thought instead of doing a regular review of the movie, I would do a comparison video.
Hi everybody! Welcome to the best channel on YouTube, because it has me, Little Red!
This 2025 version of Disney Snow White is definitely not the first live-action version of Snow White that has come out. There have been so many others, but the two most popular versions before this year, funnily enough, both came out in 2012. And I thought it would be fun to compare these three versions. The 2025 Disney's live-action remake of Snow White, the 2012 movie Mirror Mirror, and the 2012 movie Snow White and the Huntsman. This video contains spoilers. So all three movies follow the same beats. They are about a princess named Snow White whose mother dies when she is young. Her father remarries an evil queen and she escapes the castle. She meets some dwarves and she ends up taking back over her kingdom from the queen. There's also a poison apple involved to greater or lesser extent in all three movies. In Mirror Mirror, Snow White is played by Lily Collins. The evil queen is played by Julia Roberts, and funnily enough, this version is the only version where the father doesn't die but comes back in the end, and he is played by Sean Bean, who is notoriously known for dying in his movies. In Snow White and the Huntsman, Snow White is played by Kristen Stewart, the evil queen is played by Charlize Theron, Sam Claflin and Chris Hemsworth play a love interest and the Huntsman. In Snow White 2025, Snow White is played by Rachel Ziegler, and the queen is played by Gal Gadot. All three movies open telling the story of Snow White. In Mirror Mirror, she gets her name from her appearance. Of course, it's the skin is white as snow, hair is black as ebony, all that blah 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 from the original cartoon. In Snow White and the Huntsman, it's very similar. Her mother gets the idea from seeing a rose against the background of snow and wishes for a daughter with white skin and courage like a rose with its thorn.
Every, rose has its thorn.
In Snow White 2025, they kind of deviate from the standard origin of Snow White's name in having her born in a snowstorm, and that's how she gets her name. I know there's a lot of controversy around that because Rachel Ziegler isn't your typical fair-skinned person. However, I really understand the choice to do that. I think it makes sense to have a white person where it's culturally appropriate to have a white person cast. However, when your movie's main theme is about beauty, in any context, I don't think saying that the pinnacle of beauty is skin as white as snow is really a road that you should go down. So I actually do respect Disney's choice to cast a Latina person in this role. That being said, I really appreciate all three actresses for their portrayal of Snow White. I thought Rachel Ziegler's short haircut looked a lot like the cartoon version. I thought that the bubbliness, the smile, the singing, the hair all just contributed to bringing out the cartoon version into this live action role. Lily Collins, I think, is such a sweet version of Snow White. She is probably the most typical looking for a Snow White character. She is very fair skinned. I think they darkened her hair for this movie. She's very sweet, but also courageous. She can hold her own. She's probably the version of Snow White that I like the best, just because I think out of the three, Mirror Mirror is my favorite. It's the one that I have seen the most. Kristen Stewart is gorgeous. I think she is beautiful in this role. However, I don't know if it had something to do with her also being in Twilight at the time and kind of her reputation for maybe being more of a one-dimensional actress. They don't give her a lot to do. I think she is super sweet and she does the best she can with what she is given, but they don't really develop her character that much. The things that they develop about her are more spoken and not really shown on screen.
White Hart bows before the princess, father.
He's blessing her.
What are you talking about?
She is life itself. She will heal the land. She is the one.
That That being said, there's a lot of mannerisms that are associated with Kristen Stewart, like the playing with the hair, the biting of the lip, that everybody seems to say are just part of her acting, and it's really not. I was kind of expecting to see all those Bella mannerisms because she was playing Bella at the same time, and they really weren't there. For the most part, it was a different character, and she did a good job, and I really enjoyed watching her play Snow White. I feel like she has really proven herself to be a good actress, and I really wish that she had gotten the opportunity to develop this character more. As far as the Queen goes, so Julia Roberts is probably the most fun. She kind of narrates a lot of Mirror Mirror. She tries to portray herself as the protagonist, kind of the sympathetic character, but it's obvious very early on that she is just vain and nasty and cruel.
Ivory skin, black hair.
Her hair is not black, it's raven, and she's 18 years old, and her skin has never seen the sun, so of course it's good.
Gal Gadot, I really liked her as the evil queen. She really brought, again, the cartoon version to life. I did think her singing was really good. I thought just the evilness of the character, she did a good job bringing out. However, the standout out of all of them is Charlize Theron. She is hands down the best of the Wicked Queens. What I appreciate about Snow White and the Huntsman as opposed to the other two is they give her a backstory. She is a woman who has obviously been taken advantage of by men. She has been really hurt by men and has dealt with that and compensated by that by developing a hatred for pretty much everybody, not just men, and being very self-focused because she's the only one who will take care of herself. All three queens have magic abilities. In Mirror Mirror and Snow White and the Huntsman, their ability to use magic deteriorates from themselves. There is a cost that they have to pay. In Mirror Mirror, that cost doesn't come out until the end, where she uses so much magic that she ages completely.
Are you ready to discover the price for using magic?
In Snow White and the Huntsman, she is actually quite old, and she keeps herself looking young by sucking the life out of the young women of the kingdom. But every time she uses magic, it ages her. So both Mirror Mirror and Snow White and the Huntsman, by the end of the movie, she has used so much magic that she looks like an old hag. In Snow White 2025, she doesn't have probably the same magical powers. However, her magic doesn't drain her. Like in the cartoon, she mixes potions, does cheap tricks.
Cheap tricks? Not one of these is a cheap trick. Except for the cheap trick.
As a display of magic, it's not quite so overt. So like I said, all three movies, Snow White's mom dies young, father remarries the evil queen. In Snow White and the Huntsman, the evil queen actually kills him on their wedding night. Snow White sees, she knows that the queen killed him. In Mirror Mirror, at the end, Snow White ends up finding out that her father was enchanted by the queen and turned into a hideous beast that roams the woods, that the queen then says she is protecting the kingdom from this beast. So Snow White ends up getting her father back at the end. In Snow White 2025, it's kind of a blend of the two. Her father had disappeared to fight an army that was rumored to be a threat to the kingdom and never returned. Through the movie, she thinks her father might still be alive. She's trying to find him and finds out by the end that the queen had killed her father. So now let's talk about the love interest, because we know Snow White always has a love interest. In Mirror Mirror, Snow White meets the prince while he's traveling through the woods to her kingdom to meet the queen. They hit it off, they become friends. They have a mutual attraction pretty quickly. The queen has taken all of the riches of the kingdom for herself. She has spent it on making herself beautiful, on elaborate clothing, and just the richest lifestyle she can have, and has essentially bankrupted her kingdom. So she is looking to marry a king or a prince from a wealthy kingdom in order to take that kingdom's riches since her kingdom is poor. The queen tries to kill Snow White to get her out of the way so she can marry this prince. In Snow White 2025, Snow White meets a rebel. He is breaking into the palace to steal food because the kingdom is very poor, again has been decimated by the queen's greed. He is trying to steal food, she meets him, they have a mutual attraction, and when she ends up leaving the castle to escape the queen and being killed, she runs into him again and they hit it off. And that is the love interest for the movie. He's the one who breaks the spell after she eats the apple and falls into the sleeping death. In Snow White and the Huntsman, it's kind of confusing. And I don't know if part of that is because they were wanting to make sequels, so they didn't really develop the romantic storyline very well, but there are actually two. There's Will, who was a childhood friend who had escaped the night that the queen took over the castle, and when Snow White and Will are reunited, they confess that they have feelings for each other, but they haven't seen each other in a long time, so it's beginning stages of romantic feelings. There's also the Huntsman, who is hired to find Snow White after she escapes the castle. They don't really have a lot of romantic chemistry. He is a widower who lost his wife and he's still very much hung up on his wife, and Snow White kind of reminds him of his wife, and so he kind of develops an attraction that way, but nothing is really very fleshed out. Nothing is really developed. It ends up being that both Will's kiss and the Huntsman's kiss are what breaks the spell for Snow White, and it's not really explained why. Mirror Mirror, however, doesn't even have the poison apple part. What ends up happening is the prince is hung up on Snow White. He's not really into the queen. In order to get the prince to agree to marry her, the queen gives the prince a love potion. They kind of get around the ickiness of that plotline because Mirror Mirror is more of a children's story by having the love potion be more like puppy love.
What? A llama? He's supposed to be dead!
Yeah, weird.
So he's obsessed with the queen like a dog would be. He actually kind of turns into more puppy-like mannerisms instead of being a true love potion.
We're gonna have so much fun. You could take me on walks. You could throw sticks. I will retrieve them. You can rub my tummy.
And what breaks the spell is Snow White kissing him. The poison apple doesn't actually come into play until the very end of Mirror Mirror, where the queen, who is now an old hag from using all the magic, tries one last attempt to kill Snow White on her wedding day by offering her a poison apple, but Snow White doesn't fall for it.
Age before beauty. It's important to know when you've been beaten.
All three movies have the magic mirror. I think they're all very cool and very stylized in very unique ways, and I don't know which one really is my favorite. In Snow White 2025, it's the classic, like the cartoon of like the gold frame mirror with the face, like the ghost face inside of it, and I really liked it. I really liked it in the live action movie. It really brought the cartoon to life. It was very nostalgic. I just really liked how true to the cartoon they stuck with the mirror. In Mirror Mirror, in her quarters, the queen has a mirror, but when she says mirror, mirror on the wall, she's actually able to step into the mirror and goes into this kind of water world with these like twig huts. She goes inside the hut and there's like a chair and another mirror where she talks to her reflection. It's really cool. It's a unique take, and when the queen ends up being destroyed at the end, that water world just shatters and gets destroyed.
So it was Snow White's story, after all.
At the end of the 2025 movie, the mirror tells the queen she could never be the fairest of them all because Snow White is so much better than her, so much more pure of heart. She's beautiful outside and inside, where the queen is evil and ugly on the inside. So the queen smashes the mirror and ends up getting sucked into the mirror. So those are kind of similar concepts, I guess, in a way. In Snow White and the Huntsman, the mirror is like a gold plate that sort of shows a reflection reflection because it's so shiny, but it's mostly just a gold plate. But when the queen talks to it, this gold statue like arises from it and she talks to the gold statue. But then you see other people watching her talk to the gold statue and they can't see the statue, they just see her talking to the mirror. So that's an interesting concept. I liked that one as well. In Snow White and the Huntsman, the mirror doesn't actually get destroyed at the end. I think it comes back in the sequel, but I haven't seen the sequel. Now we'll talk about the dwarves because all three movies have the dwarves. In Mirror Mirror, when Snow White runs away from the castle to escape the queen trying to kill her, she ends up getting knocked out in front of the dwarves' hut. The dwarves aren't miners in Mirror Mirror, but robbers. They rob the coaches of the queen as they go back and forth from the palace. Snow White 2025 is the classic 7 dwarves: Dopey, Sneezy, Happy, Grumpy, Doc, Bashful, and Sleepy. However, in the 2025 version, they didn't actually make them dwarves. They're more like magical small creatures. I think they did this to get around the controversy behind having little people in a movie because Snow White, the original cartoon, Snow White is very patronizing to the dwarves. She treats them like children. She doesn't treat them like grown men. I don't really get why they couldn't have just cast little people and just change that part of the story and not have Snow White talk down to them. I felt like she didn't really talk down to them in this 2025 version. There is some development of Dopey's character and she helps him and he talks by the end of the movie. I felt that was a cool story, so I don't really get why they couldn't have changed that problematic part and made it not problematic and given little people a chance to be in a movie. Mirror Mirror does this. They cast all little people, and so does Snow White and the Huntsman. I feel like Snow White and the Huntsman especially does a good job of treating them not patronizingly, as being very capable and respectfully. Mirror Mirror, there was a few parts where I felt like Snow White did kind of talk to them like they were children, kind of scolded them. But for the most part, I felt like it did a good job, and it gave the role to real actors instead of just making them CGI. The dwarves play a big role in Snow White 2025 and Mirror Mirror. I'd say pretty much the same role of kind of being Snow White's caretakers while she's away from the palace. In Snow White and the Huntsman, they meet up with the dwarves and the dwarves decide to join Snow White in fighting to regain her kingdom, but they're not a very big role in the movie. So overall storyline, if you're looking for more of an epic adventure, a more grown-up story, I'd say Snow White and the Huntsman would be the one to watch. It is more adventure, it's less of a kid's story, there's battle sequences, whereas Mirror Mirror and Snow White 2025 are a little bit more geared towards younger people, more towards children. I'd say for the one that's, for me, the most fun to watch is Mirror Mirror. I think it's just a really cute story. It's simple, it's not that long, and it's just a fun twist on the basic Snow White story. Snow White 2025, though, I really did appreciate. I liked all the nostalgia that they brought to life from the cartoon. For the most part, I liked the songs. It is a musical. I didn't really like all the original songs as much as I liked him in some of the other ones. The live action remake of Beauty and the Beast, I really liked the original songs that they added to that movie, whereas this one, they're a little bit more forgettable. They're not quite up to that standard. And having them break out into songs every 20 minutes or so gets a little bit old, but it did have the runtime, I'm sure. I did like the chemistry in Snow White 2025 between her and the dwarves, especially Dopey, and her and the rebel that she ends up falling in love with. And it is a pretty key element to the movie. The movie wouldn't really be much without the romantic plot between the two of them. So I'm not sure why Rachel Ziegler acted like the romance was not even a major plot point of the movie and that it could just be cut out and the movie would stand on its own.
It's really not about the love story at all, which is really, really wonderful. And whether or not she finds love along the way is anybody's guess until 2024. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut. Who knows?
Because it really couldn't. Without that, the movie would be like 45 minutes long.
What was she talking about?
While I do appreciate Snow White and the Huntsman, I like watching Kristen Stewart, I like Charlize Theron, I like a lot of elements of the movie, it is a little bit too long. And a lot of it is her and the Huntsman just traveling through the forest. I watched it twice to get ready for this video because I hadn't seen it yet. So I think it's worth watching. I can understand why some people would like it the most. And one other thing I want to mention is the costume design. Mirror Mirror has some fun costumes. Snow White kind of spends a lot of the movie in a white dress that she wears to a party before she escapes the castle. And then the dwarves help her pick out this blue outfit that's feminine but also practical, and it's so pretty on Lily Collins. She looks so beautiful. And then the last scene at the wedding between her and the prince, she's in like a blue ball gown, but it is very reminiscent of the standard blue dress from the cartoon Snow White version. There's a scene where the queen and the prince are going to get married before Snow White breaks the spell and gets him out from the love potion, and she is wearing just the most ridiculous wedding dress ever. It is so comical, it's so funny. The costumes in Snow White and the Huntsman, they're a bit more toned down. There's not the bright colors. It's a little more practical, a little bit more for the times, kind of a period piece. For the most of the movie, Snow White does wear kind of a practical dress that has like the sleeve cutouts like in the cartoon version. So it's kind of reminiscent of the cartoon as well. There's not really a lot that stands out as far as costumes go. The best costumes, hands down, is Snow White 2025. All of the outfits are so perfectly matched to the cartoon, especially the queen with like the head and the crown and her dresses. The just color matches perfect. Her look, it's wonderful. I think that's what really sold me on the movie, is how well the costumes matched the cartoon, how nostalgic they were. Snow White's outfits, again, very live action comparable to the cartoon. I really, really liked the costumes in Snow White as someone who doesn't really notice costumes that much. Trying to put between these three classics, Mirror Mirror is probably my go-to, but I think they all have a certain something to offer depending on what you're looking for. There's a lot of negativity around Snow White 2025 that I get where it comes from, but I think the movie is worth watching if you like Disney movies. Maybe you can appreciate a live action remake. I think it's worth checking out. I think Snow White and the Huntsman is worth revisiting, especially now that we're not in that time where it was really cool to hate on Kristen Stewart. She's proven herself to be a good actress. She has a good fan base. So this movie is worth rewatching. I think you'd be pleasantly surprised how different her character is in this movie compared to her Twilight role. And Mirror Mirror is a really fun watch. I think if you were gonna show it to your kids, you'd probably watch Snow White 2025. I think that would be the safest bet, but as they get older, maybe preteen age, they would have a lot of fun with Mirror Mirror. I enjoy it now as an adult as an easy watch if you're looking for something more lighthearted. It's similar to the movie Ella Enchanted starring Anne Hathaway. They're very similar. Let me know what your favorite version of Snow White is. Leave a like, leave a comment down below. Thank you for watching. I hope I see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and drink water. Bye-bye. Subscribe!